Thank you so much for coming back this afternoon to RAM Assembles, which is our biennial architectural festival that is organized by Rachaporn Art Museum and the Rachaporn. And today is our last session of Planetary Potluck. And in this session, we have Rachaporn from Ozone, who is the artistic director of this edition of RAMa, who will be moderating together with Bart-Jan Polman, who is the curator of the Planetary Potluck. And the Planetary Potluck, we had 5 sessions already, and today we are arriving at discussing the Planetary today. And joining Bart and also Rachaporn today, we have Zheng Bo and Tripaldi, and to give everybody a little bit of a biographic parameters. Tripaldi is a researcher, writer, and postdoctoral fellow at the Center of AI and Culture at NYU in Shanghai. Her work investigates the materiality of technology, focusing specifically on the agency and intelligence of matter. She holds a PhD in material science and nanotechnology and has taught courses, seminars, and workshops in several cultural and academic institutions, including NYU Shanghai, the Basel Academy of Art and Design, FHNW, Media Lab Matadero in Madrid, the University of Roma Tre, the Institute of Postnatural Studies, and the New Center for Research and Practice. Her book, Parallel Minds, that is published by Urbanomic in 2022, was translated into multiple languages and presented at the festival and conferences worldwide. And we also have Zheng Bo, who is an artist that is learning to live a good life on Earth, one of material simplicity and ecological vibrancy. Since 2013, he has been studying with plants, ferns in Taiwan, mosses in Scandinavia, grass trees in Western Australia, and date palms in the Arabian Peninsula. Lately, he is turning towards the ocean, getting to know a coral reef in the South Pacific. Zheng Bo's practice has received support from institutions such as Kiasmus, the Huntington, Göteborg Kunsthal, Gropius Bau, and the Jamil Art Center. In return, he has contributed to this institution's evolution towards more than human conception of art. Zheng Bo's works are in the collection of Tate, Hammer Museum, Hong Kong Museum of Art, among others. And he's participated in Venice, Liverpool, Taipei, and Shanghai biennials. And over to you, Bart.
Thank you, Yoni. Thank you for that introduction, and good afternoon. And welcome to all of you for our 6th and final Planetary Potluck, where it was already said we've sort of reached the scale of the planet. My name is Bart-Jan Polman. I'm incredibly happy that Rachaporn is joining me today for the conversation, and I'm honored to have Zheng Bo and Laura Tripaldi here to share their objects and specific knowledge about these objects. So, the concept of these Planetary Potluck conversations has been developed in response to the RAM Assemble's larger theme of the Shanghai picnic, as it was developed by Rachaporn and Ozone for RAM Assembles. A potluck, which often takes place as a picnic, traditionally means a communal dinner to which each guests bring their own food to share with everyone else. For these potlucks, however, instead of food, we asked our guests to bring objects, one object or multiple objects at a one-to-one scale, and we asked them also not just to bring these objects, but also their specific and expert knowledge about these objects. And then, so although that's not really food, there is also some food here today, which will be circulated. I heard there's Oreos in matcha and peach flavor. There's popcorn, there's choco candies, and sort of planetary gummy bears. But on the stage here, we'll really discuss other objects. So then the idea is to really discuss the work and knowledge of the guests through the objects they bring in the form of sharing with all of you a collective audience. And we hope to have a conversation with all of you in a few minutes. And we've done that. Oh, wow, thank you. I'll try. These are amazing. And we've done that, as was said, through 6 conversations in these past 2 weeks that started sort of with the geographical focus of the Rachaporn site itself, really discussing this specific site and sort of zooming out through Shanghai, China, East Asia, Asia, and now the sort of planetary. But in a way also, I think, going in return also very much back to the specificities of the site, and I'm thinking specifically also about your work, the work that you've done for Rachaporn, Bo. So while each of these conversations have their own specific focus, there are some general themes that we like to address in each discussion. One of them is the notion, in a way, of infrastructure, understood not as simply as techno-physical systems, but really as ecological and social constellations that shape everyday life, mobility, and access. And I think the question of ecological constellations today is especially pertinent. Emphasis will be placed on how infrastructures might connect grounded localities to planetary realities. And all of the objects the guests brought, you're welcome to come here. And maybe some of these we can circulate with the audience. Yeah, that's in some note. Okay, so I would like to ask maybe Laura to start by explaining the objects.
Okay, hello everyone, it's great to be here. So for this potluck, I brought with me 3 materials. I couldn't really pick one, mostly because most of my work deals with materials. So yeah. Well, let me first tell you what I brought, and then I will try to explain why and how this relates to my work and my research. So the first material that I brought, I think, is something that everyone would recognize. This is a crystal, a natural crystal. It's rock quartz, rock crystal quartz. It's made of silicon and oxygen arranged together in a very regular structure, and it grows naturally in various environments worldwide. This specific one was collected in the Swiss Alps. The second material I brought is actually a liquid, and you can see it in this bottle. It's like this black drop. And this is ferrofluid. This is a synthetic material that's composed of very small particles, very small magnetic particles dispersed in a solvent. And it has very interesting properties that I will show in a moment. And then the third material is actually a living organism. And this is Physarum polycephalum, also known as the slime mold. So this is a protist. So it's called a mold, but it's actually not technically a mold. It's more like an amoeba, and it has, it's kind of like a shape-shifting organism that I just put in this Petri dish, and you can see it's actually feeding on oat flakes that I gave it last night. Yeah. Okay, so the reason why I decided to bring these 3 very different materials is that in different ways, to me, these 3 materials sort of speak of this concept that's very important for me, which is this idea of the intelligence of materials, which was also sort of the central topic of my book, Parallel Minds. So of course, we're used to thinking of materials like as passive things that humans can manipulate and shape. But as a scientist working in the lab, I slowly realized that materials are actually capable of self-organizing and responding and remembering and doing a lot of things that I would define as intelligent behaviors in a broad sense. So for example, the quartz crystal of course, is not a living organism. This is an inorganic material, but it is an example of self-organization in nature, where inorganic elements combine to form a very regular structure that almost looks like it's man-made, right? And so crystallization processes, for me, really capture this idea of the capacity of matter to slowly form intelligently, almost like this complex and regular geometric structures. The ferrofluid is another interesting example of self-organization, and it's a self-organization of a different kind. So if you look at this material in its sort of normal state, it's just a black droplet of oil. But if you have a magnet and you put it close to the material, you will see, this is kind of hard to see because it's very small, but you will see that it starts forming these very small spikes that sort of move around with the magnet. And this is like an example of like a self-organizing nanomaterial that produces like this sort of regular structure as a result of a multiplicity of interactions between all of the small particles dispersed in this liquid. And you can see like we have here a material that's not only self-organizing, but it's also responsive. So it can sense the presence of a magnetic field and it can self-organize as a result of the presence of this magnetic field. And so this principle is sort of the basis also for the development of many new technologies that try to exploit the capacity of matter to self-organize and to respond to different stimuli, so smart materials, responsive materials, and so on, which are finding more and more applications in design, in environmental applications, and so on. And lastly, the slime mold. So the slime mold is a very surprising material organism to me because it kind of captures the idea of intelligence as being decentralized. So the slime mold doesn't have a brain, of course. It's a very, very sort of primitive organism, or a very simple and rudimentary organism. So it doesn't have cells, it doesn't have organs, but still it is capable of performing very surprising cognitive tasks. So for example, the slime mold has been observed solving very complex mazes or optimizing the path between different points in space, even surpassing in a certain way the intelligence of other intelligent systems like computers. So to me, the slime mold, with its decentralized and delocalized structure that still sort of is capable of exhibiting this surprisingly intelligent behavior, is a manifestation of this capacity of materials to assemble from the bottom up and solve complex problems. And maybe, challenge our own definitions of what intelligence is, which tends to be very centralized, very controlled from the top down.
Oh, thank you, Laura. This is amazing. Can we pass them around, or is that if
sure. Someone come pick them up. So this is the slime mold. This is the ferrofluid. There's a magnet too. There you go. And this is the quartz crystal.
Many thanks. Bo, can I invite you to explain what you brought today?
English or Chinese? You want me to?
Anything you feel like.
Okay. It's okay. I'll keep in English. So I picked this up on the way here. Just 2 leaves of the Goushu, paper mulberry, and paper mulberry. I think that's the English name. And just on the way here, just 3 minutes away. Because most places in this area are landscaped, but this one managed to grow because probably the company doing the landscape management is not doing a great job. Huh?
They didn't kill this one.
Yeah, they didn't kill this one, and there are a few other sort of weedy plants there, but this one is really recognizable, right? And I think anyone who have seen this plant will never forget. And our ancestors used to make paper with this. Okay, so this is just on the way here, and this I picked up. This I picked up from my village in Hong Kong. So I live now in a village on Lantau Island, and this is Jiujie. I think it's Psychotria something. Okay, and I use this if I get a cut. Yeah, you know, the village is on the ocean. You know, I think a couple of years ago I went to swim, and part of the beach was very rocky with a lot of sharp rocks, and I didn't know, and I was coming back to the beach and then, you know, cut my feet really badly. And I read about this, so I actually, you know, I went to pick up the leaves and just break the leaves, put them on my feet. And I think the healing was at least, you know, I would say, you know, normally it would take maybe a week, and with this, it took 3 days for my feet to heal. And this is one of the most common plants in Hong Kong. And I'll put this in the hot water. We can also drink it. I think it's also energizing. And I was talking to a scientist in Germany a few years ago. She's a biologist. She studies biofilm, bacteria that come together to build these very complex structures. I mean, very, very solid structures. So let's say, you know, our kitchen sink, if we don't clean it very well, there will be biofilm. And there are natural plants like this that's actually really anti-biofilm. Not just antibacterial, it's actually anti-biofilm. She said her part of the family is in Greece. So she says in Greece, there's also a plant of the same genus. So she wasn't surprised. This is a medicinal plant in Hong Kong. So I just bring these two. I mean, this one I actually use. The other one, you know, the paper mulberry, I haven't made paper, but now I think I'm going back to do drawing. I mean, there are people still making paper with paper mulberry. Maybe one day I'll try, yeah.
Thank you, Bo. Maybe we can also, if someone wants to pass these, pick them up, we can also pass these around. Thank you both. Maybe before we get into the conversation, one thing that might be obvious, but I want to mention here is also, we basically decided to bring you two together because there's both, in both of your work, there's very specific notions about sort of more than human or non-human intelligences at work. But both your practice is incredibly different, I would say, but the questions you address are the same. So that's just for the framework. I don't know if you want to start. I can start? Okay, I'll start. I wanted to start with something that the artist Michael Wang, I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but sort of made me aware of the other day through a studio he's teaching, which focuses not so much on kinship, let's say, and kinship between different species, whether more than human, organic, inorganic or not, but is actually focusing on violence between different species. And I think both, particularly in your work, kinship is a central theme, Laura, and maybe that's something in your work you could elaborate on. But I'm curious if there's a place for violence in your sort of let's say human non-human relationships that you address in your work. A dark note to start on, but maybe.
Well, you know, of course, like, I think, like, the word, like, kinship, violence, of course, like, these are very human words, like, okay. So, I think it's always useful to sort of translate concepts from the human sphere into like the more than human sphere, but also like keep in mind the differences there, right? I don't know, like I think like, yeah, there is like a way to translate these concepts, but also I would be sort of careful in doing this, right? Especially in a time where violence is so overwhelming and widespread. But also, well, I don't know, for me, I think I've been thinking a lot about human relationships with materials and how this relationship has been normally sort of a kind of very extractivist relationship, of course, one of imposing form and structure from the outside. And a lot of my work tries to rethink this relationship with materials in a way that sort of allows the material to speak for itself in human practices, in technologies, and so on. So I think, like, for me, this idea of violence maybe resonates with this. So the possibility of rethinking this relationship in a different way. And of course, like, materials will always, in a way, resist our action on them. So there is a dialogue always going on. So it's not like a relationship of just obedience, right? But more of conversation, I would say.
Oh, would you like to respond?
It's hard to talk about violence on a Saturday afternoon in a picnic. But, you know, I immediately thought, oh, you know, it's good I'm not an architect, because I think architects are much more violent than artists.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Next thing I'm gonna
Right. So, you know, we can have a fight, you know, to see who's less violent. But I think, you know, maybe just coming back to the planetary scale, I think we're living in a very violent age. And, you know, I'm sure you are part of that violence. I'm part of that violence. And I think it's somehow we got rid of most of the violence among humans. We externalize that violence to the non-human world. I mentioned to you, now I'm also trying to spend more time in the ocean. The thing that I think about every day when I go to the ocean is I don't want to be bitten or eaten by a shark. I think it will be quite traumatic. But we kill something like millions of sharks, right? I went to a dinner a few years ago in Hong Kong, in the art world, where shark fin soup was served, right? So I think, this is only part of the small tip. I'm sure we'll come back to talk about technology, about, all the data centers now that are being built, et cetera, that kind of violence. But anyway, I'll stop here.
Rachaporn, please.
listening to what both of you said, the relationship between human and materials, especially, well, as an architect, like who built, we always assume that material is in our hands to do things that we wanted the material to do, regardless of if it's used to be alive, organic, or whatever. But as long as it is in our hands, and we never really touch, actually. We specify it. And we believe that it is kind of static. It will remain like that forever. And we assume that we can command the life of the material, or the shape of the materials, or the behavior of the material. But actually, it's not always the case. Most of the architecture or buildings problem are from the fact that we cannot really command the material to the level that we thought we could. And the more we try to command, the more violence, as you just said, we become. For example, I have very small knowledge of all this new way of using laminated wood, and but then I always have this suspect that it is really violent act towards wood, that you try to make wood become something else. So my ideas or my conversation towards you, not really a question, it's more like it seems that from your approach, you just said that the material has its own intelligence, the way we command materials or the world around us is very violent. And actually, there are also a lot of intelligence or even knowledge that we don't even understand that it actually exists and it's there. But with our limited understanding, we are not able to kind of engage to that in a better mode. My question or conversation towards this is that you think that we are now started to see materials or the worlds besides human perception of the static world as more, let's say, I don't want to use the word organic, but more that all this material have life, that it would be changing, it would respond, it would actually give different performances. The word performance is bad because it's really like human-centered. Give different behavior to the built environment.
Yeah, I think like for sure like there is a cultural transition going on, and it's like I think it's evident in many fields, like from philosophy, of course, like new materialism has become sort of a new way of thinking about materiality, not just as passive, but like active and responsive and so on. And like increasingly in art practices, you can see this attention to the non-human and a reflection on materials as being active and agential and not just static things. Like maybe what I think like might be a missing link or something that could be like be developed more, right, is also like once we accept this new sort of cultural understanding of matter as active and agential, how do we translate this understanding into a new way of making things on different scales? So I think like, well, my research mostly deals with not large-scale construction, so not exactly architecture, but more like I'm more interested in what happens at the smaller scale, at the material level. And I think like in technology, in emerging technology, there are like some new approaches that are emerging for working with materials differently. So for example, biohybrid technologies that combine living materials with non-living materials, soft robotics where the body of the robot is not just a mechanism, but is capable of deforming and changing morphology to perform different tasks. So, or even like in computation, which has been so attached to very rigid substrates, like silicon, we're now sort of slowly moving towards different substrates that are adaptive, that work similarly to how a biological brain would work. So I think like there is definitely something happening slowly and gradually, even though it's always, I mean, I think like it's still hard to see how that could like become applied on a larger scale. But I think like there's a big and interesting and fascinating challenge sort of for the future. Yeah.
Well, since you brought up the violence of architects, do you want to?
I totally agree, but I want
Yeah.
to hear more.
No, I was interested in architecture when I was young, and then now I look back, I think it's, I think a few years ago I was in Kyoto, and then I was saying, I mean, they were building the new campus for the Kyoto City University of Arts, and I actually think, you know, it kind of, you know, sorry, we'll go back to the, you know, one of the most fundamental issues. I think we have enough space. Truly, we're building because we just, you know, we're monkeys, and then we're bored, and then we need something to do. And I think if I were, you know, honestly, if I were doing architecture, I'll be doing, you know, de-architecture. You know, I'll take things away instead of building things. Sorry.
Many times people come to me and they said, actually, I don't think you need a building.
Yeah, but it's also, but you know, but then it goes back to the question. There are just so many of us. You know, there are just so many of us humans, and then we all have brains, and then we all want to do something. And what do you do about that? I mean, I don't think the system has an answer.
Don't you think that in general, architecture is an act of violence? In general,
you know, I think that's why I said I don't think it's you know, I don't want to sort of focus on architecture, right? Because I think, you know, the overall situation, everything is violent. I think art is also very violent. I think teaching is also very violent. You know, I think that's something. I mean.
That's fair. That's fair.
To add maybe like, I don't know, something like to contribute to the conversation, because for sure, like, I think like the way we're making and building things is definitely like unsustainable. But also like the concept of architecture itself, like I often wonder, like, can we open it up a bit more? I have kind of this obsession with spiders and how they build their spider webs and how they have this symbiotic relationship with their silk. And this is a material that allows them to sort of inhabit the world in different ways, perceive the world, think also in a certain sense. It's like a cognitive extension, prosthetic of the spider. So maybe like we should also look beyond human architecture, like towards like non-human, more than human architecture, and how that sort of could become a paradigm for how we make things or how we think about the things we make.
I agree, and I think maybe added to that also to the cracks. That's I think why it's so beautiful. The first leaf you brought, I forgot the name of the paper mulberry. That's it. Yes, because that sort of emerges, as you explained, like unintentionally through the cracks in the system, and I think maybe that's where the potential is for architecture to exploit that a little bit more. I'm already sort of starting to look around the audience to see if there are questions. Yeah, Yoni, please.
I think I'm just curious to know for both of you, how did you first started working in the field that you are in and working the way you are working? Is it started from some sort of, because you said that you were always quite fascinated, and then I think, yeah, what prompted you into working with the material that you work with, Laura, and also with Zheng Bo? How did you start to work with plants?
Okay, so this is a very difficult question for me also because, like, mostly because I cannot really define the field where I work in. So people always ask me, what do you do? And I'm like, okay, so I need to start from the beginning.
That's a good thing, no?
So I don't know, like, I think I've always been interested and fascinated with materials. Like, honestly, I think it started also kind of with playing with materials, you know, as a kid, like bubbles, clay, all of this sort of materials that were soft and transforming and self-organizing, crystals and so on. So it's like a very intuitive fascination for me. And then I became a scientist. I did, for a while, worked as a proper scientist. And then I sort of started feeling like I wanted to explore those questions from a broader angle. And so, and it was also honestly very much determined by the people I met along the way. So I had the chance to, you know, connect with many people that were not scientists, but were very curious about materials, like artists, architects, philosophers, and so on. And so that prompted me to explore these other worlds.
I worked with humans before, and but I was, you know, when I was working with humans, I was also interested in people that are very different. When I went to Hong Kong, I was very interested in Filipino migrant workers because they're just so different. I think then I realized, okay, I kind of know how humans behave and how humans think, and then I think maybe working with plants, it's just because they're there, I just never thought about how they live. So I think last 10, 12 years, I try to spend as much time as possible with plants. And now I don't know much about ocean, so yeah.
But do you grow plants or you just observe them?
No, I'm very lazy. I don't grow things. I mean, there are plants everywhere, right? So I just go. And also, I like these very weedy plants because they're really resilient. I don't need to grow them. You know, they just pop up. Even in Shanghai, they pop up.
Yeah, I was also curious about like what you think about gardens, because my supervisor here in Shanghai, she's a philosopher, Anna Greenspan, she has a research project on the history of gardens. And I think I'm always very fascinated by this. And I'm curious, like as a person working with plants, but also like clearly you have, I don't know, an attraction also to sort of unruly spaces. So I'm curious what you think about gardens. Like, is that also sort of a violent space, or?
You know, I keep saying we're monkeys, right? So, I think we're very tentative still. I mean, my experience at least, I think gardens are usually spaces where we try things, and perhaps it's good in a way that we try things in the garden rather than we just try things in the forest. So maybe that's a good thing. Yeah.
I find this fascinating to hear this dialogue between the two of you, because one of the things I wanted to ask about is about, you know, what for you constitutes intelligence, which is also a very human-centric sort of term. But I think, Laura, you mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong, but intelligence for you is a form of organization, right? Is that correct? And the garden is a sort of organization of nature. So anyway, I wanted. Sorry.
He wants to show something.
Please, yeah.
So when you talk about this,
yeah,
I immediately thought about fish, small fish swarming. I just recently learned, like there's a guy who studies collective intelligence of small fish when they swarm. It sounds so similar to the way you describe about this material. So I was thinking the line between life and non-life, perhaps I shouldn't hold that line very clearly. Yeah.
Yes, so, okay, two big questions. But I think, like, it's absolutely right. Like, I think organization is one of the main features of intelligent behavior. But also, like, when you have too much organization, like, I brought, like, I think different degrees of organization today. So the crystal, it's very organized, but it's also, like, very still, at least on our human scale. And something like this, instead, is like very dynamic and very fluid, and the slime mold even more, right? So you have to have a balance between order and contingency and fluidity and chaos in a way. And then like you have other things that also emerge from this very, I would define it as a soft organization, because you have then the capacity to perceive things If you're too ordered and structured, you don't sense anything. You're not affected by the world, but you need to be affected by the world to be intelligent in a way. So yeah, and I think like this also relates to your question. I think like something like this is sort of in between life and non-life, and you can find many material systems that are in this gray area where, and I think like these systems are interesting because they allow you to sort of try to open up this definition of life, which we tend to think of something very, very clearly defined, but it's really not.
I found that this is one of the most interesting issue when you talk about all this material behavior, because we usually believe that life has intelligence, but this is life. I don't know, when you talk about this as a kind of organization of the fish, it has some kind of similarities. Okay, yeah, so it came to the idea that what is life actually? What is life, what is not life? And that is, it's the way we kind of define and give the perception to our, to things around us. Like these materials, actually, probably, I don't know much, but it perhaps also contain some kind of intelligence, as you just discussed.
Yeah, well, I mean, also I think like it's interesting. Our definition of life tends to be very centered around the individual, like because we're humans, like we're not plants, right? A plant, often if you take a piece of a plant, the plant is going to be fine. Maybe you can even create a clone of the same plant. So individuality for the plant means something, and for us, it means something else. So I think like this is also an interesting issue when we think about life, and also sort of the scales of life. Like maybe a group of fish that's in communication with each other and self-organizing, like maybe even the entire school of fish is an organism in itself, not just the individual fish. So where do we draw the line in that way?
I think the question of where to draw the line, I would like to push both of you a little bit on that, and the sort of notion of, let's say, ecological constellations and where things end and where things begin. I was fascinated by your piece here at Rockbond with the different trees, let's say, and there's a sort of classification going on between trees that you have met in your life and trees that you have not met yet. So that's a sort of understanding of different ecosystems as related to notions of memory, I would say, which is a sort of human understanding of things maybe, but then there's memory in materials as well. So I want to push this question of where ecologies end and where they begin a little bit more, and also, you know, looking at these things, of course, these are contained objects, or the two of them, let's say the bottle and the Petri dish, are very contained ecosystems in a way here for this purpose. Anyway, so where do things begin and where do things end for you? Which is it's also a big question, I know, but maybe we can start. And maybe specifically also, you know, the notion of the robot was mentioned here. So there's like where is intermingling possible and where is it really not possible, maybe between different ecologies or systems?
So I mean, I think recently I started to think about, you know, the stars actually always are out there, right? We just don't think about the stars. Because we don't think about the stars. I mean, the stars are always there, you know, because right now, you know, the sun sort of overshadow all the stars, but the stars are always there. And, you know, that you said this session is about planetary, but it could also be universal. And I think, I haven't read the book, there's a new book coming out, someone who did a lot of physics with Hawkins. It's about the evolution of the universe. So looking at the universe from an evolutionary perspective. I haven't, I just listened to the podcast. I haven't actually read the book, so I kind of goes back to what we were talking about, life, non-life, and then different scale, from the very, I mean, we're not talking, I'm sure you understand quantum stuff, right? So, from the quantum level all the way to the universal level.
Yeah, I think definitely to go back to maybe the first question, there is a transition happening where we are really starting to realize, or I mean, I don't know, at least there is a growing theorization of the existence of, matter as something that is alive and self-organizing on different scales, different levels. So I think this is something that's extremely interesting. And at the same time, I'm not sure, I just want to put this out there and then you can tell me what you think. Sometimes I'm a bit also concerned that, and some people also have pointed this out, that once we start to just say, okay, I don't know, the planet is just a living organism, the Gaia theory that maybe you've heard of, which is this idea that the planet itself is this self-organizing living organism that's just always capable of healing itself. But if we push this to an extreme, also we start to lose track of what is the role of humans, what are we supposed to do? If the planet itself is already taking care of itself and it's alive and it's in balance by itself, then what are we doing, So I think maybe sometimes it's also important to remind ourselves that what is our plan? What do we want to do with this knowledge? So for example, going back to materials, I absolutely agree that any material has a capacity for self-organization. Any material is intelligent in its own way. But then our role as humans, designers, scientists, technologists, whatever, is figuring out which is the way for that material to express its own intelligence in the maximum way possible so that we can create a more ecological relationship with materials. So for example, if I have wood, I have different ways of using wood. I can chop down a tree and build a bridge from the wood that I take out of the tree. Or, I don't know, there are these living root bridges in India that I've been very fascinated with. And they're just living, they're made of living plants, living trees, right? So, and they are better than an artificial bridge in many ways because they can self-repair, they have more flexibility and so on. So same material, different design approach, different technology. So I think this is something that we have to keep in mind, what are we doing with this knowledge?
But with our more advanced technology, you think we are able to understand this better?
I think technology is such a huge term, right? So I think some science and technology can move in that direction, and it can also move in very different directions, right? So I think the main issue is also cultural, and I don't think necessarily that going in the direction of increasingly complex, increasingly advanced technology will make things necessarily better. Sometimes looking at other practices will allow us to learn more. The living root bridges, they've been made for, I don't know, I think thousands of years, right? So that's not high technology in the way we understand it, but it's also a good way, a very highly technological way of think about our relationship with materials, or again, maybe how do animals use materials, for example, spiders, beehives, whatever.
I think we have a question here. Yeah.
Hi, I just want to say, when you said about the planet always healing itself, I actually completely agree. I think it always is. If we do continue to accelerate climate change, the planet will heal itself in the sense that it will get rid of humans. The end of the world is just the end of human habitation on the world. That's quite interesting. Yeah. Anyway, that's an aside. Sorry. I want to ask a question about relinquishing control. And there's a building in London by an architect called Armin Tahar, and it was a stone building, got a stone facade, and basically the planners said, oh, this is nothing like what you submitted to planning. It looks completely different. And like the response was, well, actually, no, this is just like, I always said I wasn't going to finish it or cut it cleanly how it came out of the quarry. This is just how it naturally came out of the quarry. And that's just talking about stone and how we, he didn't control the aesthetic of the stone, and so he relinquished control. But like the planner said, you're going to have to knock this building down, and like that was going to happen. So there was a big campaign to save it, and eventually we saved it. But that shows how much we fear control. Like what we submit to planning has to look exactly the same. So architects are like really fascinated about controlling the materials that they produce, or at least work with. But in the context of rewilding and in the context of that example there, like how much, how can we relinquish control? What is an acceptable means of relinquishing control in a way that can be accepted by society, I guess, today? Sorry for the long question.
The question is basically about relinquishing control, and I'm wondering specifically, maybe to start with you, for example, when you go swimming, and you mentioned that you're afraid of being bit by a shark, let's say, or you cut open your feet on a rock. So maybe that, like, to approach that question, like, how do you control when you go out in the ocean, and are there other ways for you to sort of relinquish control, or?
I mean, many things become linguistic questions, right? So. I actually think all these conversations we can just read Taoist text. Like
whose text? Sorry?
We can just read Taoism. We can just read Taoist text. When we talk about the book 2,500 years ago thought about this very carefully about relinquishing control, precisely this issue. So for Chinese, we know that term. We know this term wu wei. In English, I think the better translation is non-coercive action. So my understanding, based on what other people have written about this, is it's not completely inaction. So kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier too. So it's not like doing nothing. You just lie there, wait until you die. We are living beings, so there are things we do, right? We grow, we play, we eat, and then we fear sharks, and maybe we eat some fish from the ocean, but we don't coercively plan, control, build. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like one aspect that you brought up that I think is very interesting is also like the aesthetic dimension. Like I think Europe has a very long history of appreciating order and geometry and rational control, also in an aesthetic sense. And this is something that sometimes gets in the way of an engagement with materials that is a bit more open, right? So there is outrage when something doesn't look tidy or it's like in its natural state. I think this is transitioning, this is why art is very interesting, right? To see how aesthetics transition and how that reshapes our broader cosmology. But still, I think broadly we are very attached to this. Like we want things to be geometric and rational and orderly. I often, I've been very fascinated, although I really don't know much about it, but I was visiting Suzhou and the gardens in Suzhou, and I saw these rocks called Taihu rocks. I think they are extracted from a lake, and they are limestone rocks that have this very porous structure, and they have holes, very organic looking forms. And I'm very fascinated by how this naturally forming or organically looking rocks are appreciated aesthetically, traditionally, in comparison to maybe the standard of Western sculpture as being this vision of control and representation, right? So maybe I'm not sure maybe Bo knows more about this, but I think like maybe it resonates also with what you were saying about a different appreciation of aesthetics that speaks of a different cosmology that we might try to cultivate.
This is precisely what I'm interested in now, because I'm still teaching, right? So you all teach, right? So I teach art, and precisely like we were saying, how do we define aesthetics and how do we sense beauty? I think it is very political right now. Whether we appreciate, respect, learn from the beauty of non-humans, whether plants or animals or fungi, slight mold, or rocks, etc. Like, you mentioned the rock in Suzhou. Whether we appreciate and respect and learn from the non-human aesthetics, or whether we're so arrogant that we think we are the only aesthetic beings on the planet. Only we make art, only we appreciate aesthetics. I think that's a very political issue right now. Yeah.
Any other questions? Maybe, there's a question there.
Hello, thank you so much for, I'm really inspired by this format of bringing an object to the round table or the discussion. So I was wondering, each of you come from sort of slightly different disciplines, though related. For those of us here that aren't artists or architects or scientists, is there maybe an exercise or a way to think about maybe like, I'm trying to think of like an applied an anecdote or something like that that you could share with us, or for those of us that don't think like artists or don't think like scientists or aren't thinking about the implications for our discipline but our everyday lives, if there's some kind of, I don't know, application or exercise that you might recommend that we engage with to maybe see things the way that you do, or are related to this object that you bring to the metaphorical table?
Maybe I should answer that question. I mean, I think it's not I think the format is completely sort of not tied to any discipline specifically. Of course, it happens to be the case that all of us work in specific disciplines, and also these past few days. I think the idea is really to start understanding how everything around us that we sort of engage with is, of course, and I'm saying things that are, of course, incredibly obvious, but are part of larger constellations. So the idea is really when we had sort of conversations before, I randomly picked up things from the table, that if you let's say pick up a bag of Oreos, then you don't just appreciate or eat it, let's say, but then you try to understand it. Okay, so there's a whole infrastructure around the ingredients. There's an infrastructure around plastics. Okay, we can talk about microplastics that enter up in our bloodstream. So it's basically understanding objects as they have an effect that might operate at the scale of, the planetary or the universal even. I prefer universal, but it doesn't have the alliteration, let's say. But so there's the different scales at which things operate. So something can operate at the sort of molecular level of the bloodstream, the microplastics, but can also have an impact that is beyond. So that was the sort of basic idea. So to answer your question in the sense of if there is an exercise that, I think it's a way to think about objects that goes beyond the objecthood, let's say, itself, but it's much more of a sort of material ecology of things. That's the sort of basic outline. And then the speakers specifically have very specific knowledge, as you can hear, about these objects. So then that would allow us to go into depth. So yeah. I don't know if that answers your question.
I just want to add that when Bart proposed this idea of potluck, I really like it, because usually most of the time architecture conversation I'm an architect, so I'm talking about architecture conversation. We use slides, projector, and we show buildings. This is the building we do. For me, it's a little bit distant from the audience, and it's like, it's nice, and then what? The idea of bringing objects on the table that people can touch, people can see, help a lot of us to understand the issue we are discussing in a very tangible way. Like you touch and you know, you feel, and it's like this, it's heavy, it's very light, it's hot, cold, smooth, and so on. So just bringing us back to be more tactile, and when we are more tactile, maybe we feel more, we understand more. That's what I try to kind of encourage.
I'm laughing because I realize, actually talking about tactile and physical experience, now it's very elitist. No, sorry, I'm just joking, because I think now virtual reality, like all these things, VR, like AI, all these things are class issue, right? So people like us who are privileged in some way can sit here, touch actual objects, and many people are not able even, sorry, I'm not, no, I'm laughing because I realize, now I'm sure people will say we're also elitist.
We are. We have to be aware that we are. And not only that, like if you are elite enough, you can, I'm not trying to kind of go back to you. I would love to as well. Elite enough, we can live by the beach, right? Exactly. So that's how tactile we could go. That's not everyone could afford to do that. But I think being elite, but being aware, that's the key. I'm not saying that this is politically we are in a nice position, but this is how things work.
Any other questions, Feifei?
Because Bart has commissioned me to ask questions.
Only if you want.
We are forcing you.
Thank you very much both for your presentation. I'm interested in, I think, the differences between the objects you guys are presenting. One is the kind of picked leaves that seems to have this kind of spontaneous act, whereas Laura's have like a very specific containment of material. It just reminds me of the exhibition that I'm co-curating right now with Anna Singh about fungi. One of the projects we have is by architect Phil Ayers, and the title is called Architecture Must Rot. What's interesting as an architect who does a lot of mycelial experiments is a lot of experiments in lab environment actually fails in real environments. So I'm quite interested in, I guess, when material becomes human material, the removal of context and kind of, wanting to fall under human manipulation. So I'm just wondering, within architecture and within art, I think in the arts as well, where you present ecological kind of topics, but in the white space, and that kind of removal of a context seem to raise questions of exactly what, we're trying to, I guess, understand. So yeah, in a sense, I just wonder, when does ecology become material, and when does material become human material, and how do we prevent that extractive process in that transition?
Okay, so of course, it's a very challenging question. I think, well, I don't know. It's my belief that as humans, but also this might be true also for at least some non-humans. We cannot really give up technology. So technology is just something we do. And we just, our task is really finding a way to conceptualize the artificial and the synthetic that is as ecological as possible, as harmonious as possible with the environment. Like, clearly we are doing this wrong, and we've been doing this wrong for a long time. But I am also, like, I think that, or at least what I am interested in, is like finding ways in which we can still inhabit the technological without it becoming necessarily violent or destructive on a massive scale. And I think this is possible. Of course, it requires a cultural shift, it requires research, it requires collaboration between people that work in very different fields. But I think it can happen slowly and gradually. Of course, like, we could say, like, I mean, I think we have to be conscious that we are human, even when we talk about the non-human. So of course, like, yeah, the Earth takes care of itself because we go extinct if we keep doing what we're doing. And we can decide that it's good, but like, as humans, that doesn't serve any purpose, and that would cause a lot of suffering to everyone. So yeah, we just have to find a way. And I think, like, from my angle, like, of someone interested in technology, I'm looking at ways in which this could maybe possibly happen.
Thanks. Other questions? Yeah, Mai, please.
Hi, thank you for the talk. It's really interesting. I have a question about our understanding of material as having no agency, I guess. My question is that I feel like this is actually kind of a new understanding if you think about, like, the whole history of humankind, I guess. Because in the past, people thought of wind as having agency, or thunder, or whatever. And I understand that now we have science, and then we shift that understanding. But I'm just wondering if there is like, value, or if that kind of relationship with, or understanding of material can have a place in, or inform how we think of material now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think this is very interesting. Personally, I mean, this would require a long answer, but I agree. Like, it's a very modern conception, like this one of matter as being passive. I'm very interested in magical ways of thinking about matter, like especially the history of alchemy in Europe, where matter was understood as something that was capable of transformation and agency. So I think, like, that also by looking into the past, we might rediscover ways of interacting with materials that are different, for sure.
Maybe as a sort of way towards a conclusion, you're speaking about magic, and Bo, at one point you already brought up quantum mechanics, which in a way is for me a form of magic, and which of course is different, but that sort of in relation to your question of can we conceptualize ideas of aesthetic that are outside of sort of human notions of what is beautiful, and is it up to us to decide what is and what is not? I'm wondering, and sorry, this is again maybe on you more, Laura, but do you like how does your work engage with quantum mechanics, and what can you help us? Can you help me understand a little bit in the context? Of, yes, yeah. Okay, because especially, sorry, just to want to add one more thing, because what I find fascinating is the sort of two places at the same time kind of thing. So the sort of bridging of the gaps, let's say, between maybe the local and the universal. Yeah, maybe that's a start.
Okay, yeah, that's. I mean, like, I would say specifically, I don't engage that much with quantum mechanics. Like, of course, I think, like, you know about Karen Barad's work. She's a philosopher who has written a lot about quantum mechanics as a new way of thinking about matter as not made of individual things, but more of a relational ontology. Okay, this is very complicated. Like, maybe now is not the time to talk about this. But I think, like, definitely you can find a lot of inspiration there. You can. I think, like, you know, science is an endless source of inspiration. And so, like, I don't necessarily think that there is something that, necessarily unique about the quantum perspective that you cannot find in other ways of, understanding matter. But like, definitely you can find something there. You can find something in chemistry. You can find something in classical physics, in like non-Western understandings of matter. So, yeah, I don't really want to get deep into quantum mechanics right now.
Simply the notion that it's not that different, as where you can find as a resource, let's say, where you can find something is helpful, I think. Rachaporn, any last words?
I'm very interested in your idea of the kind of plans, life of plants, rewilding, and all this. We are in this condition that's, I totally agree that we are kind of overbuilt. And from your perspective, how can we kind of try to, let's say, live better?
Also a big question.
Yeah. I'm interested because it's very it's not easy. That's why.
I think you started the whole conversation towards the very dark side.
We can end on.
So I think I'll say something. Maybe it also we end on the dark side. I think recently increasing. I'm sure many people have thought about this. I think we are getting closer and closer to accepting that we're going to go extinct as a fact, just like climate, just like global warming. I think probably, in next 5 to 10 years, it will be accepted as a scientific fact. And then perhaps that changes everything, right? So if we know we're going to go extinct in 50 years, 100 years, I think Hawkins said 50 years, it changes everything. I'm sure it changes the way you teach, you do architecture, you teach architecture, it changes the way, I teach art. And, we're monkeys, we only do the, I said this in New York actually last week, we're monkeys, we only do the right thing when we are forced to. Yeah.
Maybe it was too late. I think it's interesting. At most of the time, we do things because we have to believe it first, right? And as in terms of technology, we can do a lot of things, but we don't do because we don't believe.
Sorry, just to maybe, I'm sort of rephrasing myself. I think now is the moment to be dystopic. Yes. Sorry to be so dark.
Do you agree?
No. No, I just don't think, I don't think it's true that humanity will go extinct in 50 years or a century. Our lives will change, are already changing. In other places in the world, lives are changing way faster. So the idea of this end of the world, that's just this point in the future that we're moving towards, I don't think is necessarily useful. We're going through a transition that's hard and difficult, but it's already happening, right? But there are many ways of existing. Humanity has been around for an immense amount of time. And we have no track of most of the time humans have been on Earth. We don't know what these people were doing. We don't know how they were living. So, I tend to be, open to the unforeseeable future.
Maybe that's the sort of slightly more positive note that we should end on. So open to the unforeseeable future. I think that's a good way to end these potlucks. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's really stimulating to think, and it's like especially it's the last potluck series. So I think we have a lot to think further. Thank you so much.
Thank you.